Good day, everyone. It's Alan Schimmel, Security Boulevard, DevOps.com, and welcome to another great webinar. Today's webinar is a bit of a crystal ball gazing look ahead at 2018, the year in cybersecurity. And I'm going to tell you more about it in just a second. But first, I just want to go over with everyone our GoToWebinar control panel. We're looking forward to some great questions. We want to hear what your thoughts are around cybersecurity in the coming year. And the GoToWebinar control panel and system gives us a great way for you to do this. If you look at your panel, you'll see a section marked questions. And if you hit the arrow or caret next to questions, you'll see it expand. You can type your questions in there. The beauty of this is you do not have to wait for the question section to ask your question. Ask your question in real time. We may get to it in real time, but if we don't, we'll still have it queued and ready to go at the conclusion of the webinar in our question session. So please don't wait. Type them in real time. We'll have a record of it. We'll get them answered for you. It's easy and it works. If you're having technical difficulties, though, maybe the slides aren't advancing, the audio isn't great, there is a chat section at the bottom of your control panel. And if you would be kind enough to just, if you're able to, type in there what your problem is, and we have people standing by who will try to help you with that and make it work for you. So questions go in the questions section, technical issues go in the chat section. And with that being said, let's dive right in here. So as I mentioned earlier, today's webinar is a look ahead 2018, the year ahead for cybersecurity. And it is actually based on an ebook, which I'm going to tell you more about in just one second. Before we do, though, I wanted to tell you a little bit about the great panel we have lined up today. In addition to myself, really happy to have for his first time on one of our webinars, but no stranger to presentations and webinars, Joseph Feynman, Chief Innovation Officer of Veracode. Joseph, welcome to today's webinar.
Thank you, Alan. Glad to be here.
Thank you. Glad to have you. And from White Hat Security, none other than Jeannie Warner, Security Manager at White Hat. Jeannie, welcome.
Delighted to be here again, Alan.
Yep, I think we're going to have a good time. So looking forward to having you here. So as I mentioned, we're taking a look at the year ahead in cybersecurity, and a lot of the material that we're going to be discussing here is contained in and refers back to a great ebook that we've put out. Everyone who's registered, and there's hundreds of you who've registered for the webinar, will get at the conclusion of today's webinar an email with a link to download the book. It's easy, it doesn't cost any money, and it's actually a unique book for us. We do a lot of ebooks at Security Boulevard and DevOps.com, but what we did with this one is we went to each of our featured writers. These are writers who cover a beat. People like Mark Rash, who's one of the most prominent cybersecurity attorneys in the world, for instance, writing about cyber law. Christopher Burgess, 31 years at the CIA, writing about nation-state cyber incidents and so forth. George Hume, who one of our editors here, and George actually kind of shepherded this book, and you can see on your screen now his sort of intro to the book is up here. And several other just great writers, Scott Finney comes to mind. You'll see it when you do get the book. So I do encourage all of you, whether you're listening to this live or perhaps you're listening to this on YouTube or on Security Boulevard, check the book out, 2018, the year ahead. Download it. There's about 7 or 8 different topics. We're going to cover probably 5 or 6 of them today. And check it out. I think you'll find it very interesting. So let's move ahead. So one of the when we look ahead to 2018, the logical thing to do is, well, what did 2017 bring us? What did 2017 look like? And certainly 2017, one of the big stories in cyber was ransomware, right? And I'm going to assume that everyone in our audience at least is familiar with the term ransomware. Hopefully you weren't struck by it. But ransomware made a big deal in 2017. And Joseph, with your history at Gartner and everything else, I'm just going to ask you a quick opinion. When people ask you, should we pay the ransom or hold out, what kind of advice have you got?
I believe that ransomware is the punishment for our sins, for being lazy, for not listening to warnings, for not listening to alarms, for not patching the system, for not putting our endpoint protection system in the right state. The funniest thing of ransomware, although it's a very serious thing, the funniest thing about it, there is nothing, or practically nothing new with ransomware. It's a traditional malware that just encrypts data, and instead of destroying your computer or stealing data, it requests a ransomware. So it propagates the same way as other malware did for many, many years. It leverages known vulnerability the same way as traditional malware. It just demands ransom. So, there are many issues related to that, and I would love to talk about that. But as to paying, well, the first thing, you might do it. If you do it just once. After you did it once, go back to your endpoint protection and plan it properly and configure it properly and have an early warning system and listen to alarms coming from vendors. The most famous attack last year, that WannaCry, right? Well, what happened? Microsoft issued warning and patch 2 months in advance, 59 days to be very specific. So industry had 59 days to fix this vulnerability, and a great number of organizations in, I believe, 150 countries around the world have not done it. So what else can you do? So my point is, if you pay the ransom, do it just once, the first time. After that, get back to your endpoint protection systems, patch all necessary assets, configure EPP the right way, and so get prepared so the next time when you're hit, you wouldn't be paying ransom.
Yep, shit. So fool me once, shame on me. Fool me twice, shame on you, or something like that. And I would also add, make sure you do have sort of clean backups. We actually saw some of these ransomwares that would not only encrypt your infrastructure, they'd actually go back and encrypt your backup as well, would become infected. So make sure if you're back, you should be backing up, obviously, and make sure that there's a wall there between it. Look, so Jeannie, let me give you a chance. What do you think, pay or play?
I'm with him in the pay once, but I just wanted to bring up a reminder for healthcare had a specific kind of ransomware that went wild, and the FBI actually sent out a note to a few hundred hospitals. If you remember the Samus.A or the SamSam ransomware, that one wasn't actually, that was the first of the non-traditional new ones that we saw. That was due to a weakness in the JBoss or JBoss, which is a debugging tool for applications. And that one kind of moved in through the back door, so there wasn't actually an endpoint that can catch it. And a lot of application servers don't necessarily have an antivirus on them, which may be, I think, one of the new moves, because they went out and said, all right, do you have JBoss? And you had a lot of IT security companies who were used to looking at their antivirus saying, what's JBoss? What's JBoss? How do I patch that? And that was the first time we really saw the developers having a say being brought to the table for ransomware, saying, your tools, are they updated? That's a debugging tool. So I just thought that was kind of interesting that it looks like, fall back and regroup, because antivirus out there is getting really, really good and really, really quick with a lot of their natural language processing, looking for new families as they come out. But when it hits the server-side attacks that they just go in directly through the application server itself, I think that's an interesting new method of attack, and that may be something that our industry gets more fun of playing with.
Yeah, I mean, maybe we need to start applying some endpoint type security agents and technologies onto our app servers and on the web. Here's another interesting thing that I saw about it last year. I was able to catch a good presentation, and I darn if I remember who right now, but they said if you are going to pay the ransom, that you should basically the folks wanted in Bitcoin. Now, I'm not going to get into the whole Bitcoin speculation game, and maybe they were doing it as a futures options but puts, but it's interesting that some of the advice I saw was to put away some Bitcoin in case of ransomware, and you can pay it quickly like that. But overall, Joseph, I think you were dead on here that it's encryption. That's all it is. Instead, we're infecting your files, we're encrypting them, and we have the key to unencrypt them. There's nothing kind of uber unique there. What I give these guys credit for was their innovative business model, right?
It is not the technology, generally speaking, but new business model.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you let me, the interesting thing when you mentioned innovation, I can give credit to these guys that invented new model, but as technology-wise, it wasn't such a great innovation. Sometimes people confuse ransomware with zero-day attacks, but that's not so. There is nothing new for hackers to invent in the new release of a software. They are not searching for a new vulnerability. Quite to the contrary, they are looking for vulnerabilities that are very well documented, that have fixes. They are just relying on our laziness to check those available patches and actually apply them. And I can make a prediction, as long as you're asking about prediction for 2018. I believe that there is a statistic that shows there is about 10 to 15 times more documented, discovered vulnerabilities that have not been fixed than those that have been invented. It means that our hackers, they have 10 to 15 times even more opportunities than today to attack us, because we have these vulnerabilities and they have not been attacked yet. And that, I believe, is going to happen this year, 2018.
Yeah, look, we used to call them 0 days, but clearly they keep them in their back pocket, and that goes to a whole other thing, which I don't have a slide about, but the whole bug bounty programs and these kinds of things, where we do try to, limit the amount of these heretofore unknown vulnerabilities or in the wild kind of exploits and so forth. But certainly ransomware, I saw one thing that, when you actually look at the money paid in ransomware, it wasn't in the billions of dollars last year, because most people who paid the ransom, it was a relatively small amount, speaking the thousands of dollars, tens of thousands, not hundreds or millions. And it'll be interesting to see if that goes up this year. And also, to Jeannie's point, where we start seeing not the endpoints getting encrypted, but servers and other infrastructure, perhaps storage, becoming encrypted. But that being said, so ransomware, go hybrid this year. Joseph, I think you made a great prediction there. Let's move on to the next prediction in our ebook, and that is around the struggle of CISOs. So, Jeannie, Joseph, myself, we've all been in the security business for probably longer than we care to admit.
I like being old.
Well, Jeannie, I think you're the youngest, but anyway, we've seen the rise of the CISO as a real player. Oftentimes, maybe they're not on the board. They may or may not report directly to the CEO. They may still report to a CIO. Sometimes they're part of the IT team, sometimes they're not. But certainly, most organizations today have a CISO or a CSO. The job was never easy, right? I don't know many CISOs who stay in their position for a long time. But it seems to be like it's going to get harder in 2018. Jeannie, I'm going to let you go first on this one. What's your opinion?
I think it is, especially when a lot of them are being held responsible for things that they have never done, never physically interacted with, because CISOs seem to come up from one of two tracks. Either they're a head of engineering and so they know all of the toys and they become CISO, or they come up from some kind of auditing or legal background. And neither of those are really dedicated deep into the IT security space, but at least the auditors have a certain idea of thinking, of methodical, well, how does this work, and questioning every step. And I think those can be some of the most successful, but only if they're willing to go out to the IT people and say, okay, tell me about all of these pieces. I understand patching. What do I need to patch? And the diligence of discovering what they don't know is important, because in the end, they're answering to a CEO and a board that are saying, what are the risks? What are the consequences of those risks? If I buy these toys that you recommend, am I more secure now than I was yesterday? And am I keeping up with the Joneses? So they're looking for the new things. They're worried about APTs, and they're worried about the latest stuff that we hype in the media. And yet at the same time, just to re-hammer home a point from the previous slide, my first question to each one would be, what do you patch? How are they doing it? Do you have a DOS? Are you going to be a DOS sort of organization like the gaming industry, for instance? They DDoS each other. It's kind of frightening. And they're worried about all of the latest technology and the latest pieces. And I've got to have, machine learning. Don't want to get ahead of that, but that's a later slide. But they're worrying about all of the latest toys without anybody really sitting down with them and talking about the basics. What do you think, Mr. Funny?
Yeah, no, I mean, and it goes to what Joseph said earlier too, is, we could talk about IoT and we could talk about virtual reality and we could talk about blockchain, but darn, we haven't even set a good baseline for the mundane stuff, for the block and tackle stuff, let alone the blockchain stuff. You know what I mean? We barely do just the basics right, and now CISOs are being tasked with stuff like IoT and blockchain and so forth. Joseph, what do you think?
I believe that the main problem that CISOs are facing actually are not technological issues. To be successful, CISO must not be the best technologist, the best security specialist. There is an issue of business awareness. There is an issue of, by the way, you mentioned it, Ellen, that statistics shows that many CISOs are not reporting to the very top of the company. They are not reporting to CEOs. They are reporting, some of them, to CIOs at best, but they report also to internal audit, to IT middle management, to line of business managers, and that should change. We tried to figure out what is happening, why our response, the industry response to attacks are quite poor, and we conducted an interesting survey. We surveyed about, if you give me a chance to give a few numbers, we surveyed 1,000 business leaders in Europe and the US. It was US, UK, and Germany. And we received quite amazing results. Remember, last year, I believe, or year before, was the year of Equifax breach. Listen, 28% of business leaders never heard of Equifax breach. Last year was a year of WannaCry, and only 10% of these business leaders, by the way, by business leaders, I mean CEOs of the companies, owners of the companies, general managers of the companies, and only 10% said that WannaCry ransomware attack led them to rethink their approach of cybersecurity. So what the remaining 90% was thinking about that? Probably nothing. Only 50% understand the risk of vulnerable software poses to the business, and only a third of them understand risk of open source software. Nowadays we are deeply involved. Well, the DevOps.com, for example, only primarily speaks of development and secure development and development with open source, but only 1/3 of business leaders understand that open source component might pose business risk. So we try to figure out what is going on. We ask them, do you have plans to change the situation? And you know what? Almost 50% said, yeah, we're discussing, and we'll be discussing through the year of 2018 things such as updating outdated operating system. Can you imagine the depth and breadth of such an approach? 20% of business leaders said, yeah.
First, go ahead. I'm sorry. I didn't mean finish.
No. What I want to say that what we realized at the very end that 25% of U.S. business leaders and 33%, 1/3 of British and German business leaders have no plans in cybersecurity in the next 12 months. For a year, they'll be doing nothing. And that should be changed. The primary objective of CISO should be trying to change the situation, reaching to the board of directors, reaching to the CEOs, trying to get reporting on a regular basis to CEO, change the perception of business leaders, because at the very end, business leaders are budgeting CISOs and CIOs, by the way, and they are responsible for shareholders and users. So it's not a technological challenge that CISOs are facing next year. It is an issue of having an ear of owners of the company.
It's organizational.
I can echo that.
It is organizational.
I can echo that too. When we asked and said, what are your priorities? What are you looking at? We had over 80% of our own responders came back and said, just education. So 100% agree with you on that one. Just how do we teach them what they don't know? How do we teach them why? Believe it or not, there's a lot of organizations still on XP. And we were dancing around in Microsoft when we didn't have to support XP anymore. And that's still a standard in a lot of companies and a lot of organizations. So just you hit it right on the nose.
So Jeannie and Joseph, you're both right. And same stuff, different day. I remember doing surveys like this in 2005 and getting the same answers. Right? It's the same thing. When, because first of all, generally speaking, the security people talk a different language than the business people, right? And business people are talking dollars and cents, security people are talking risk, and they don't translate their risk to dollars and cents. The CISO was supposed to be the person who changed that. He's the translator between the security technology and the business angle of it. And Jeannie, to your point, depending where the CISO came from, he might know the technology, he might not. He might know the business angle of things, he might not. And nor does the CEO really care, because he's a mid-level kind of.
Unfortunately,
he's a mid-level executives, right? He's not on that exec team. It's a this doesn't change. My point though is that now when they have to face new threats, and he's responsible at some level for working his security team who has to deal with this, and they get their budget. They may not have new cybersecurity plans, right, Joseph? But they still get their budget. They'll buy the new trinket this year, whatever the hot thing is. Maybe something in machine learning, or something like that, right?
Some of them will, but they won't have staff to properly configure this protection system, same firewalls, same web application firewalls. So clearly there is a deep disconnect. I agree with you, Ellen. There's a deep disconnect between the executives of the company and CISO that has not typically made into the real executives of the company.
Yeah, I agree. All right. So certainly we have a few questions though I'd like for us to, if we can get to. Now's as good a time as any. So Roman Zillick says, a big separator is internal versus external threats. A CISO has to understand the concepts and formal background of threats to get a chance to consider proposed solutions. If not, they're at the mercy of security product providers or consultants.
Yeah. Well, I have a data point on that. In our survey, we realized that 25% of business leaders don't understand malicious employee activity. They still believe that all good guys and only good guys are inside the organization and only bad guys are outside their organization.
Yeah.
Although, we know that the most scandalous attacks that happened over the last several years, they were caused by or perpetrated actually by insiders, by employees, by contractors, by consultants. And 1/4 of business leaders don't understand that. So I agree. There is a difference between perception of internal attack, insider attacks versus external attack. We are turned outside, not noticing what's happening inside.
Excellent. John Fowler, another person on today with us, says some areas that he's experienced with customers is that they've accepted the risk because that's more cost effective than spending updates on security. Now, that's a classic risk management formula, and I got to be honest with you. If you make an informed decision that here's what my risk is, and the cost of mitigating that risk is not cost effective, and you decide to bear the risk, I can't argue with that decision. What do you think?
I agree, because I watched it happen. I have a friend who is a data modeler for a very, very large organization, and she happened to know that they said, well, they were coming up on a deadline for compliance, and it was cheaper for them to pay a $4 million fine than it was for them to move into a more compliance model. So they put it off 2 years, paid the fine, just because it was a combination of they didn't know how to get it. They didn't have the resources. They couldn't find the people. And finding the people really is a big one. I mean, when I went trying to hire the very greatest of next-gen firewall engineers, I think there's maybe 30 to 35 on the planet currently that really understand everything from the byte level, packet level on out to configuration, support, normalization. So there really aren't all of the right people. And so a lot of them are paying the fines rather than doing that. In addition, CISOs are getting told you have a budget of $50,000 rather than them being able to come back and say, here is the budget that I need to do these, and here is the cost of the risk if we get breached based on some of the information we're seeing in the news today. I'm hoping some of the GDPR will change that a little bit just in terms of thinking, but we'll see.
Oh, I think it will, and we're going to discuss GDPR. But I'm reminded of, yeah, Joseph.
Oh, no, you're reminded of the time running, or?
No, I'm reminded.
I want to make one comment. I want to make one comment.
You comment, and I have an comment on that question as well.
Okay. You said a very important thing, a critical thing, I believe, Ellen. You said that decision makers make an informed decision. I believe the problem is that many of them cannot make an informed decision because they don't have enough information. An example is, I believe all three of us, you and Jeannie and I, we strongly believe in necessity to do application security testing to understand the security posture of your applications. But, well, we know from statistics that about 50% of all organizations never test the single applications for security vulnerabilities in the code. At least 25% of organizations never test their applications dynamically to detect vulnerabilities in the application. So what kind of informed decision can they make in that context about application security if they never do application security testing? I believe that is one of the problems. They cannot make informed decision. They may claim that their decision is informed, but very often it's not.
You can't, if you don't have the information, you can't make an informed decision. Right? It's
right.
From the Greek informa, like from the movie. But in any event, I'm reminded of the retail sector pre-Target. right? Before the big Target breach where the CEO wound up losing his job. Pre-Target, though, I was once talking to a retail executive who said, look, basically, cyber incidents, info security incidents like this, they represent like 0.05% of revenue. 0.05% of revenue. For that amount of, so that's what's at risk to them. So for that amount of risk, it just wasn't worth putting in anything more than 0.05%. Now, we have seen since Target that, you know, reputation and stock prices and everything could be so affected by cyber incidents that I don't know if that's quite is you know, true anymore. And you know, it gives the CISOs a little bit of leverage. But I think we need to remember that at the end of the day. But let us move on because time's a wasting and we've got stuff to do. And here's my favorite topic of today, and that is DevSec Ops. So both Veracode, White Hat, you guys are very progressive. You're some of the leaders in the DevSec Ops movement. Let's talk a little. I'm hoping DevSec Ops 2018 is the year for DevSec Ops. For me, it comes down to we need to make security and quality in our applications synonymous. The same way we want to deliver high quality code, performing, you know, applications, security needs to be absolutely part of that. You can't have quality without security. You can't have security without quality. And I think at its heart, that's where we want to see DevSec Ops go. But I'm interested in your opinions. Joseph, would you like to go first?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I agree that security and quality should be equally important. That is so. That should be happening. But they are not synonymous. There are a difference between security and quality. So if you're asking us to describe this 2018 and the following years, I wouldn't say that this is a year when quality will become synonymous with security. I would rather say that it's going to be a next year of the early phase of DevSec Ops adoption, where security becomes part of Dev and Ops lifecycle. So I would not expect that quality assurance specialists will start conducting security assurance operations. I'm not expecting that quality tools will be providing security assurance function. That is not going to happen, at least for many years ahead. But yes, to address this quality and security combined issue, DevSec Ops has been emerging, and it will face different issues such as emergence of new technologies, different from quality technologies, by the way, new technologies such as developer static analysis, interactive application security testing, runtime application self-protection, the culture that will be built on top of that, some issues with automation and not as clear as we might expect. There are some non-conventional things happening with automation. I would expect that processes and policies will be built on top of this technology. So we'll see shift to the left, and there is a lot of conversation about shift to the left. It will be also shift to the right. So it is a year of DevSec Ops. Unfortunately, not the year when quality becomes synonymous with the security.
Well, I'm always an optimist. Jeannie, how about you?
I am kind of hoping for a change of causal activity myself. Right now, if you go out and you say what makes a good developer, you can read a whole lot of stuff and blogs and everyone talking about how they're the best developers in the world. There is nowhere that they say secure developing. There is not one place in the developer's Bible where they say, and I make sure that I don't have SQL injection flaws or cross-site scripting flaws. And I believe in a lot of ways, because security, for years, they've thought of it as that's IT security's job securing it. I just write this stuff. And I think I agree with all of the points that Joseph said, but I think the next step is going to be getting what we do involved deeper into the tool set so that developers don't really have a choice. And I'd like to see, maybe this is just one of those saying it early, say it often, if we stop referring to it on the developer side as security and start saying this is safety. This is website safety. This is application safety. This is making sure that you and your tools, which have never been part of the IT security patching system before, but all of your libraries and all of your tools and all of your debuggers, maybe we need to start going out to those companies as well and pushing updates rather than pulling updates, so that, you know, the Apache Struts pushes saying for everybody that uses it, they get actively, hey, there's a new one, I am updating you, the same way that Microsoft and all of the other operating systems said, we're not going to rely on customers to pull their updates. We are now going to push them as often as possible. And I think that's going to be, it's going to be a couple years of a little bit of chaotic activity as that starts to happen, because people were not happy the minute that the operating system started pushing their updates saying, hey, wait a minute, I wasn't done, it doesn't work. But I think it's important from a safety point of view. So not just security, but the safety of our customers, of the end users, of my mom, the non-computer literate. I think it's going to be important.
Yeah.
Yep.
Security
So
should
again,
become
maybe I'm
transparent.
more optimistic. Go ahead, Joseph. I'm sorry.
I just want to support what Ginny said. Security, I called it transparency. Security should become transparent for dev and ops people. Otherwise, they will not accept it. We have difficulty to train developers to use best security programming practices, even such a simple thing as training. But we have an enormous task of trying to impose our security tools upon them. They'll never be able to run application security, and they should not be running application security technologies. This technology should become transparent. So really, developers should be invoking security testing technologies practically out of their IDEs. So they should be able to test for security any increment of the code, the smallest piece of the code, just the snippet of the code, and do it within not hours and days as it's required today, but do it within seconds. They should have technology that run automatically. The moment you deploy your application on the test server, it should be equipped with an agent that will detect security vulnerabilities and report right away. Only in that case, dev and ops will accept security. Only if it is transparent. They should not build learning. Yeah.
Wouldn't it be great if Jenkins said, I'm sorry, I can't commit or compile your code until you fix that line problem? So that would be awesome.
And that detection should be done within seconds and minutes, not hours and days. In that case, DevOps will continue.
When that code is committed, whether you're using a Git or what have you, when that code is committed, that's when that test is run. We shouldn't be running the test at the moment. Wait a second, let's not deploy yet. We didn't run the test. That's not the time to run these tests. Jeannie, you're right, and Joseph, you're right. Right, what you're talking about is classic shift left security stuff, where we're building, you know, these, and it's primarily testing of code, and then of course, you know, when you test the code, the feedback loop and sending it back to you know, fix whatever is found wrong, a bug or a vulnerability or what have you. But the key to doing that is not only transparency, because Joseph, you're right, developers aren't going to become AppSec pros. They're not. Mm-hmm. Can we automate those tests the same way we're automating so much of what QA does today? And that's not, and by the way, that hasn't foretold the end of the QA person, right? We still have QA people, and there's plenty of work and need for QA people, but we're automating more and more of a lot of that type of testing. We need to do that with security, and that automation has to happen along the software lifecycle, right? And it has to happen. You want to do it in a Jenkins pipeline or a Atlassian or whatever your tool is, Urban Code. Makes no difference. It has to happen not right before the deployment. It should happen more when that code is first committed, whether it be a snippet, as you say, Joseph, or a bigger chunk of an application. But I do think we're getting there. And over the last 4 or 5 years that I've been involved here at DevOps.com, I do see dev and ops people understanding that while they're not the security people, security is everyone's responsibility. I actually, in about at 1 o'clock Eastern time, it's 11:40 now, I'm doing a webinar with the RSA conference folks on this very topic, DevSec Ops, whose job is it anyway? And we're going to talk right about these things. And it's something I do get passionate about. We have a bunch of questions. Oh boy.
Mm-hmm.
We do have a bunch more questions here. Pushing updates by force can be a liability and operations risk as well. Think of the recent MS patches rendering systems useless into reboot loops. Yes, 100% correct. And, we ran into the same things. I remember when we moved from IDS to IPS. And I don't know if really large enterprises ever really jumped on the automatic update. Excuse me, automatic updates. But, I mean, what else can we do? Joseph, what do you think?
Automated updates to prevent. Well, discovery should be done. The first, if you're speaking of, I'm not sure what the subject that the person who asked the question is having in mind. But generally speaking, when you're dealing with the endpoint protection systems, malware like WannaCry, or even application security, when we speak of patches, or in application security, we more speak of vulnerabilities. First of all, you have to have awareness, and awareness comes only through detection of vulnerabilities. If you are speaking of application security, the testing should be done continuously, and the results should be available to those who make a decision. And based on the detected vulnerabilities, they can make a decision where to apply a patch or reprogram the part of an application. What we see, unfortunately, that there is a lack of awareness of existing vulnerabilities. I gave an example, I believe, about WannaCry, that for 59 days it was well known that vulnerability exists and patch is available, and so many organizations have not deployed it. We've been conducting a research on use of insecure open source components. Strangely, people believe that open source is secure. It's not true. In 2016, we realized that 97% of all Java applications have at least one open source component with vulnerability. 2017, 88% of all Java applications have vulnerabilities. So what people do about that? Very often they simply do nothing. So first of all, it's required awareness. Second, we should make sure that even if vulnerability exists and is detected, that those who would make a decision whether to fix it or not, they're aware that vulnerability exists and patch is available.
Yep. All right. We're running low on time. Guys, we could probably do an all-day webinar on this stuff, and we still not have enough time. But the next subject we wanted to just touch on was public cloud. So I think we're really starting to kind of cross the chasm. Public cloud is here to stay. More and more enterprises are putting more and more of their infrastructure on public cloud. I think in 2018, we're going to kind of pass a threshold where, the amount that large enterprises store in public cloud is a point of no return. But is this also the year where we see like a large public cloud breach that leads sort of to a breakout of containment, where one tenant on a public cloud has a breach that leads to multiple tenants on that cloud infrastructure becoming breached and contaminated? Is that a possibility, Jeannie? What do you think?
Oh, it totally is. And when we were asking if this was the year, how many articles have you seen? It's only February on Amazon Web Services. They had an S3 server that was incorrectly configured. And I think it's going to be a lot. I think it's going to be more. I mean, if you look at the whole idea of the microservices architecture, which is a lot of the cloud, you had old SOA was service-oriented architecture. Everybody remembers Enterprise Service Bus was what pushed things out to your cloud service consumers and then human users, et cetera. Microservices are a lot more fault tolerant than that, but then you're suddenly dealing with, well, did they do the connections properly? Are their APIs properly configured? How can people see what's going on? I look at much in the way that we were saying, to harken back to an earlier point we were both making of ransomware and malware being dropped into a public cloud is that much more common, that much more possible than it was, again, because they are not necessarily adding the ability to check for antivirus on every single component in their public cloud, on Azure, Web Services, Google whatever it is. So I think we're just going to see maybe not even a large public cloud breach, but a gazillion small public cloud breaches as people go out and use the cloud architecture, but they think, oh, it's in the cloud. So they've abrogated their security responsibilities over to, well, I host it on Amazon, therefore it's secured by Amazon, right? Without ever double checking to say what security is being done. And it still kind of comes back to the tool people and the integrators, is who put it all together, who said, all right, your development team, even if you gave me a beautiful, faultless program and I'm going to put up that application and I'm going to connect it to these 3 services, are the connections secure? Are those done in a secure way? Are the APIs done with security in mind? So I think it's just a matter of time, that absolutely. And I don't think it's going to be large public cloud breaches as much as we're going to see a million of them.
Could be. Joseph, I mean,
Yeah.
you're relying on that public cloud provider to at least give you transparency, visibility. Some
I see
do,
two use
some don't, some are better at it, some aren't. What do you think?
I see two use cases here. One, the probability that the cloud provider will be breached. And another use case when the business that is built on top of the cloud provider will be breached. With the first use case, the cloud provider, the probability that they'll be breached and seriously, statistically, is very low. Their history has shown that they are very reliable, that they really built their infrastructure generally from scratch, considering the utmost innovations. So I would rely on the cloud provider, especially brand name cloud providers infrastructure such as Amazon, Azure, and Google. The different story is the business that is built on top of the cloud provider. And there, I believe that, by the way, more than 90%, I believe, of all breaches, if they take place, they will be because of the failure to secure from the customer's side. So it'll be, quote unquote, another target, another retail organization, another financial organization. It wouldn't be underlying Azure or Amazon. So the security next year, if we're thinking of ways to prevent vulnerabilities, they'll be targeting, first of all, or taking place on the user side of the cloud. And this organization should be using proper technologies such as cloud access security brokers, for example, technology that would, for example, if you are uploading some data from your brick and mortar enterprise in the cloud, they'll be able to intercept it, to review based on the set of policy and say that this piece of data should be encrypted, this one data mask with data masking technology. This one should never actually leave brick and mortar, never should be stored in the cloud. By the way, CASB do not only data protection, they do authorization, they do authentication, they can do, well, encryption, as I said. There are technologies such as cloud data backup technologies, so make sure that you have backup. There are cloud application discoveries technology that can figure out what, to tell you what kind of application you exactly have. By the way, for example, the statistics that we accumulated very good, and I'm sure that Whitehead, that Jeannie has similar statistics, that organizations very often simply don't know what runs on their websites, and now their websites, their service sites will host it in the cloud. Very often they are not aware of about 20 to 30% of application sites that are up and running. So cloud data discovery should be another technology. So client side should be first target of attacks, and they might be failing with a higher probability than the brand name cloud providers.
Sure. All right. Again, time's limiting us, so let's move on to the GDPR. I mean, look, this has been a sort of boogeyman for the last, I guess, 2 years since it was announced, and now, this May it becomes real. I think you'll be hard pressed to find a company that is not going to be affected by this, whether you think you do business in the EU or not. You're probably doing business with a company who does business in the EU, and so it will affect you. And the good news is there's still time to get ahead of this. and I also do think that the GDPR, I mean, though the EU seems to have, thrown down the gauntlet and saying we're going to lead on this issue of data privacy and personally identifiable information, I do think that if we don't see a United States-wide, a US-wide equivalent, we're going to see a state-by-state equivalent, where some of the more progressive states like a California or in New York kind of mimic or closely resemble their privacy laws similar to GDPR. Joseph, if it's okay, I'm going to let you go first on this one, but we're going to try to hold it just 1 minute or two.
I believe that, as usually, we as an industry will fail in that particular case with GDPR, meaning that by May 25th, well, it is all our history shows that we're always late, and I don't believe that on May 25th of this 2018, a majority of organizations will be fully compliant with GDPR. No, I'm sure that less than half of them, and this is a great estimate, the minority of them will become fully compliant with GDPR. Well, it means that anyway, sooner or later, organizations should be compliant with the GDPR, and there are some steps that should be taking place. So, for example, the most important one probably is organization should define who is responsible for data protection in the GDPR context. You should have probably a person responsible, if you're doing business with the European Union, you should have a person responsible for data protection. We're failing data protection anyway, but at least in the case when it is enforced by regulation, we should do the first thing, define who is responsible for data protection. We have to define the legal reasons for data processing of European citizens' personal data, and decide on what ground their data should be protected and their privacy should be ensured. We should be selecting, by the way, that should be a policy related not only to in the context of GDPR, but overall, we should be selecting minimal data that should be processed. For example, if an American company leases cars to European Union citizens, it should be collecting, of course, the information from them, but minimize that number. Ask for first name, last name, and maybe bank account, but don't ask about marital status. Another thing, the idea of GDPR is protect individuals' right for privacy. So be prepared that the users will be unhappy with your services and won't exercise rights. So this is a new responsibility that will emerge within our organization. What if person says, I want you to forget about that I ever entered your website and used your service, so the rights to be forgotten. Or another thing, I believe that is funny in the era of artificial intelligence and a huge degree of automation, there was a right, I believe, under GDPR umbrella, right for decision that you're making should not be based on automated or not solely based on automated processing, meaning that, for example, if your application for a loan has been rejected and you'd used only automated processes to make this decision, they might request to have a right not to do it only based on automation. There are other things. You have to start deploying same CASB, data loss prevention technology, data masking technology, static data masking, and dynamic data management. There is a data masking. There is a huge work, and that's why I believe that by May 25th, the vast majority of organizations will not be prepared to comply with GDPR.
Absolutely. Jeannie, I hate to put you in this position, but I can only give you a minute on GDPR.
60 seconds or less. Well, 2014 is, we know there was the court case of the right to be forgotten. So in this one, I'm just going to hit the top level of the top 3 things that I think your data privacy officer ought to do. The first one is when you look through at any and all of these compliance or governance rated things, please, all of you, take the word asset and in your head add or applications, because a lot of times all of these things were written by people that do network security, not necessarily people that do application security. And sometimes the application security becomes like that afterthought. So from the very beginning, read the entire thing saying applications too. Secondly, if you apply, you're going to have to go to your marketing department and say, show me your marketing stack, your MarTech, your everything. Where do we save it? Do you have a double opt-in so that EU citizens have at one time or another said, yes, I want to continue, actively clicked the button, please go ahead and market to me. And if not, you have to have the mechanism for erasing them. That's for people listening to this wonderful broadcast and everything else. Did they say, yes, you can save mine? Yes, I want future information from you. And that's just going to be a whole business change of the way that goes through as well. Absolutely, as Joseph said, all the different pieces are going to be important in terms of protecting the data for the people that have opted in. But there's already some guidelines that can be used. I've read through the PCI and through the NIST and ISO. If you are in general compliance with NIST and ISO and PCI DSS, you can use a lot of the same principles saying, yes, I already have done this section of the GDPR because it maps over. There's a bunch of different places online you can say what maps to what based on perhaps compliance that you're already doing, like hospitals are hugely compliant. Financial organizations are very much PCI compliant. So there's just a little bit of mapping and a little bit of due diligence and paperwork that you need to do. If you haven't done any of these, I'm just going to say my first piece of advice is take this in your hand. Assets also equal applications. Go talk to your marketing department and look at your vendors and say, do you use Salesforce? Do you use Marketo? A lot of the big boys like Salesforce, Marketo, et cetera, are already doing their GDPR compliance, and they would be glad to show you yes, here's my due diligence, here's how you write it down, and basically document your business processes of data flow.
All right, guys, we're not going to have time, but look, everyone on here, you're going to get a link to download the ebook. There's a great piece there by Christopher Burgess on information warfare, talking about hacked elections, cyber espionage, Cold War. Great stuff. You should check it out, but we're going to need to skip over here today with it. I apologize. AI and machine learning, another great topic, but unfortunately, just not going to have time to cover them today. We went deep on what I wanted to. I do want to give each of you, though, Jeannie and Joseph, just a quick chance here. I realize you're both not in the sales side of the house, but I wanted to, first of all, thank White Hat and CA Veracode for sponsoring today's webinar and always being there to help us out with these things and lend some expertise. Jeannie, if you want to say a quick word about White Hat, or does the slide speak for itself?
I think it speaks for itself in a lot of the ways. We are, as we've said all the way through here, from your developer first looking at snippets of code through a production website. Test everything, people. Test your applications, test your mobile,
right.
Test it all.
Test.
Test early,
absolutely.
Test often.
And then quickly here, a little bit about Veracode, which is now part of CA Veracode. Just Joseph, again, I know you're not on the sales side of the house, but anything you want to add?
The slide speaks for itself. Veracode is a leader in Gartner Application Security Testing Magic Quadrant. In all Magic Quadrants ever published in application security testing, it's been a leader. It offers technology for static testing, dynamic testing, interactive testing, for protection as well. So, make sure that you test your application. I can only add to what's been said before, and make sure that you do it throughout the life cycle and you use modern technology that are coming to the market that makes security, application security.
Sort of like voting, test early and often.
And protect at runtime. That's important for ops part of DevOps.
Yes, guys, we answered all the questions in the course of it. There were some more we didn't get to. Joseph, Jeannie, I'm going to send you copies of those, and we can try to get them answers out to the people. We appreciate the questions, appreciate the interactivity. Jeannie and Joseph, thank you both. You know, this was a pleasure. As I said, if we would have scheduled 4 hours, we'd talk for 5 hours. So we did the best we could within the hour. Fascinating discussion. Folks, when you get your email, download this ebook. It's a great ebook with a lot more information than even we shared here. Until next time, thanks for joining us. It's Alan Schimmel at DevOps.com Security Boulevard. We'll see you soon on another webinar.
Thanks, Alan.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you, Alan.